Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The city was alive, buzzing with the chaos of honking horns, restless vendors, and pedestrians rushing about their daily hustle. Traffic choked the roads, yet the presidential convoy moved like a river through stone, uninterrupted, forceful, and surrounded by sirens that split the air like knives. Nathaniel sat inside the armored black SUV, his face turned toward the tinted glass, yet seeing nothing. His body was there, but his mind wasn't. Everything around him was muffled, like he was underwater. His father, the president of the country, had just threatened to disown him again, a routine that had lost its sting and turned into a numbing ache. As the driver sped through a congested intersection, somewhere in the heart of the bustling city, something, or rather someone, emerged onto the road. There was no time. A figure in a light green dress stepped off the pedestrian pavement, slowly, unknowingly. A cane tapped the ground in front of her. A loud scream. Brakes screeched. Metal met flesh. And just like that, everything stopped. The guards shouted, forming a protective wall around Nathaniel's vehicle. But he didn't hear them. He had already stepped out, ignoring protocol, ignoring the shouts in his earpiece. "Sir, please get back in the vehicle," one screamed. But Nathaniel had seen her, the girl lying motionless on the asphalt. Blood trickled from her temple. Her blind cane was shattered. Her lips trembled as though trying to speak, but her eyes were open and staring, yet they held no life, only darkness. The realization hit him like a wave. She was blind. The girl hadn't seen the convoy, hadn't known to stop, hadn't had a chance. "Don't just stand there," he shouted at the guards. "Get her in the car. She's bleeding. Take her to the hospital, now." The driver hesitated, torn between orders from the president and the urgency in the young man's voice. But Nathaniel didn't wait. He knelt beside her, cradled her head, and for the first time in a long time, his heart beat with panic that wasn't about himself. They raced to a private hospital under orders not to reveal the identity of the girl or Nathaniel. As doctors wheeled her in, Nathaniel sat in the waiting room, blood on his hands. Hers. The pain in his chest wasn't fear of punishment or scandal. It was something deeper, a sudden inexplicable need to see her live, to know who she was, to hear her voice. Something about her had pierced the fog he'd been trapped in for years. The doctors emerged hours later, faces grim. She had survived, but there were complications. She'd been blind before the accident. "She's a miracle," one said, but she was already living in darkness. Nathaniel said nothing. He simply stared through the hospital window into the sky, wondering what kind of world it was that would let a girl like her suffer in silence, until tragedy finally made her seen. The hospital room was quiet. The faint beeping of machines hummed like a lullaby in the background, and the soft scent of antiseptic hung in the air. Nathaniel stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the girl lying in the bed. Her face was partially bandaged, but even through the bruises, there was a gentleness to her, something fragile, yet unyielding. He had visited every day since the accident, despite being warned to stay away. It wasn't just guilt anymore. There was something about her presence that pulled him back like a magnet. She hadn't woken up fully since the crash, only muttering soft, barely coherent words in her sleep. But the moment he heard her whisper, "Mama, please," "I'm not ready," something in him cracked. This girl had a story, and for once he wanted to listen. He introduced himself as Nate, keeping his identity hidden. When she finally regained consciousness, her first instinct wasn't panic. It was calm, controlled confusion. "Where am I?" she asked softly. "You're safe," he answered, sitting beside her. "You were hit by a car, but you're going to be okay." She gave a faint nod, her fingers brushing over the sheet, searching for orientation. Her hands moved gracefully, knowing the space around her better than sight could teach. "I can still hear the tires," she said with a weak smile. "The ground vibrated before it hit me." Her words haunted Nathaniel. He was used to girls who fawned over him for his status, but here was one who didn't even know what he looked like, and it didn't matter. She didn't want pity. She wanted to be heard. And so, he came again the next day, and the next. Each visit peeled back another layer of her story. Her name was Adana. She was 22. She had once dreamed of becoming a novelist. Her voice was soft but strong, her presence delicate but deep. Nathaniel would sit for hours just listening to her talk about her world. A world where sound, scent, and memory were the colors she painted her reality with. I recognize people by the tone in their voice. Yours is sad, she once said to him, unknowingly cutting deep. He smiled, hiding the tears. She didn't know who he really was, the son of the man who ran the country, the boy raised in golden chains. For once, he was just Nate. And she, a blind girl who saw more than anyone he'd ever known, had begun to make him feel alive. Adana hadn't always lived in darkness. In fact, there was a time when she had been the brightest star in her little village. Born to humble farmers, she was the second of 5 children, but the one everyone said had light in her eyes. She would run through the fields barefoot, write poems in the dirt with a stick, and dream of big cities where her books would line shelves. Her father, despite his poverty, encouraged her. "You are my golden seed," he'd whisper, holding her tiny hands after farm work. But at age 13, she began seeing shadows. At first, she thought it was fatigue. Then came the headaches. Then the night blindness. A local nurse referred her to a specialist in the city who delivered the news. She had a degenerative retinal condition. A surgery could help, but the cost was higher than her family's entire yearly earnings. Her parents sold their goats. Her older brother dropped out of school to work in a factory. But it wasn't enough. Time passed. The doctors warned the longer they waited, the less chance of recovery. Eventually, the vision began to fade like a dimming candle. First, she lost her ability to read. Then faces. Then colors. Then shapes. By 15, Adana was blind. The day she realized she couldn't see her mother's face anymore was the day she stopped speaking. Depression set in. She locked herself in her room and refused to eat, crying silently at night while pretending to be asleep during the day. Her world had gone black, but it was the silence of those around her, their helplessness, their pity, that truly deafened her spirit. "I'm not broken," she would whisper to herself, even as she felt completely shattered. But somehow, she found a rhythm in the dark. Her grandmother gave her a walking cane and taught her to memorize paths. Her brother would clap to help her find him across the compound. Her father, despite his sorrow, would sing softly to guide her to the garden. Bit by bit, she learned to see again, not with her eyes, but with her heart. By the time she turned 20, she had memorized the entire village by scent and sound. People began to marvel at how she could navigate so well. Yet deep inside, Adana longed for a world where she wasn't just surviving, but living. She never expected fate would throw her into a city she couldn't see, under a convoy she couldn't hear coming, and into the arms of the president's son whose life was as colorless as hers. Nathaniel stood in front of the massive floor-length mirror in his presidential suite, but all he saw was a ghost of a boy trapped in a palace of glass. His reflection wore designer clothes, expensive shoes, and a wristwatch that cost more than some people's homes, but none of it brought warmth to his chest. The room itself was a fortress, guards outside every exit, cameras in every corner, and thick velvet drapes that shut out the sun as tightly as his life shut out freedom. To the world, he was the golden son of President Ifani Majuabuchi, the hope of a nation's future. But behind the marble floors and political glamour, Nathaniel felt like a caged bird, singing only to silence. His mother had died when he was barely 10, and from that moment, affection disappeared from his life like morning fog. His father had never looked at him the same way again. There were expectations, rules, posture, and speeches. His sadness was always interpreted as rebellion, his silence as disrespect. They dressed him up, paraded him, but never once asked if he was happy. Behind the convoy rides and diplomatic dinners was a lonely boy screaming inside a man's body. In his teenage years, Nathaniel tried to numb the emptiness. He turned to things the world judged silently: late-night parties, girls who came for the money, drugs that dulled the weight in his chest, and therapists who were only paid to tell him he was fine. But he wasn't. He never had been. He once tried to run away, sneaking out with a fake name and no security detail, just to experience what it meant to walk the streets like everyone else. It lasted 3 days. He was dragged back by Secret Service, handcuffed by the ankles of responsibility. His father made an example of him on national television, announcing a fabricated mental breakdown to protect the family name. "Do you know what your life is worth?" his father often scolded. "People would die just to touch your car." But that was the problem. They wanted the car, the title, the illusion. No one wanted Nathaniel. No one cared to know the boy who liked jazz, who loved photography, or who wanted to run a charity anonymously and disappear into the countryside. No one until her. Meeting Adana was like hearing music in silence. She didn't ask for his name. She didn't care about his status. In fact, she didn't even know what he looked like, and for once, that was his freedom. With her, he wasn't the president's son. He was just Nate, a voice she welcomed with curiosity, a soul she treated with kindness. Her blindness had shown him more about life than all his wealth had ever taught him. Her words lingered long after their conversations ended, especially when she said, "You sound like someone searching for something you've never seen, but you know exists." That sentence haunted him. What was he searching for? Peace? Purpose? Love? All he knew was that the closer he got to her, the less he hated waking up each day. And that terrified him more than anything, because it meant that if she ever left, he'd be back in the dark too. Adana sat up in bed, her hands gently folded in her lap, listening to the familiar sound of Nate's footsteps as he entered the room again. She'd come to recognize the weight of his stride, the soft thud of his shoes, and the scent of his cologne, fresh citrus with a hint of musk. Every time he came, she felt the world grow a little brighter, even though her eyes could no longer see it. There was something magnetic about him. The way he asked about her day, how he listened like every word she said mattered. Most people spoke to her like she was broken or fragile. But not Nate. He laughed with her, asked her opinion on things, even teased her. "If I told you I was tall, dark, and handsome, would you believe me?" he once asked, and she'd smirked, replying, "You sound like someone who looks sad when he smiles." It was the first time she heard his breath catch in his throat. From that day, they talked not just as friends, but as two people afraid of being alone. Over time, she began noticing odd things, a certain stiffness in his answers when she asked about his life, the way the nurses treated him with deference, the whispers that followed him whenever he left a room. There were days he'd leave abruptly, claiming meetings or emergencies, but she could feel his inner battle, like he wanted to say something he was forbidden to. Then one afternoon, while touching his face with her fingers, a gesture he shyly allowed her, she paused. She could feel the high cheekbones, the tension in his jaw, the sadness behind his smile. "You're not just Nate, are you?" she asked. Silence. A long, aching silence. She didn't press him further. She just whispered, "It's okay. Whoever you are, you've been kind to me." That moment, something unspoken passed between them. A deep trust. A fragile understanding that no matter how broken their pasts were, their present was something real. What she didn't know was the war going on outside her hospital window. Nathaniel's visits were being tracked. Photos had leaked to the media. Rumors of a mysterious blind girl in the president's hospital suite were already circulating. His father summoned him, rage painted across every syllable. "You think this girl matters more than your duty to this country," the president spat. "You're a disgrace. You should have left her on the road." Nathaniel didn't speak. He just stared at the man who had once been his father and now only looked like a politician behind a mask. "If you continue seeing her, there will be consequences," the president threatened. Nathaniel left the room without answering, because deep down he already knew there was no going back. The girl who couldn't see had already become the one person who truly saw him. The moment Adana's name was mentioned in a leaked political memo, the internet erupted like wildfire. Blogs speculated about who she was. Some claimed she was a foreign spy. Others said she bewitched the president's son. Photos of her hospital entrance were published, and faceless keyboard warriors began dragging her name through the mud. Blind gold digger. Another ploy to distract from the government's failures. The accusations were cruel, uninformed, and relentless. Adana, shielded from the media chaos by hospital walls, remained unaware until one nurse, who had grown fond of her, muttered a warning. You need to be careful. People are starting to ask dangerous questions. But Adana only smiled softly. I have nothing to hide. Let them look, they won't find anything but the truth. Yet in the shadows, powerful hands were already moving to erase her from Nathaniel's life before she became a scandal too big to control. Nathaniel confronted his father again. This time, there was fire in his eyes. She's blind, not deaf. She's kind, not manipulative. She saved my soul, and you want to throw her away like trash. His father responded with ice. You are not a boy in love. You are the heir to a legacy. Love makes fools of men in your position. Nathaniel had heard enough. Then I choose to be a fool, he snapped, slamming the door behind him. But power has its ways of asserting control. That night, Adana's hospital room was surrounded by government security, and without explanation, she was moved to a different wing, isolated, her phone confiscated, and access to visitors revoked. When she asked what was happening, the nurse lied. It's for your protection. But Adana knew better. She could hear the coldness in the voices, the weight in the silence. Something was wrong. She waited for Nate, but he never came, not because he didn't want to, but because he was locked in by forces bigger than himself. Still, even in isolation, Adana's spirit didn't break. She sat by the window every night, listening to the city, remembering his voice, replaying their conversations in her head. The smell of his cologne lingered in her blanket. You're sad when you smile, she whispered to no one. But I'd rather have your sadness than 1,000 fake smiles. Meanwhile, Nathaniel was spiraling. He punched a wall in his room, knuckles bruised and bleeding. They took her, he muttered again and again. But something inside him shifted, a clarity born not from power, but from pain. If they thought keeping him away from her would fix the problem, they had no idea what they'd just awakened. He would find her. He would protect her. And if that meant losing his title, his inheritance, or even his life, so be it. Adana sat alone in the new hospital wing, her thoughts slowly unraveling like thread in water. The room was colder here, the walls too quiet, not the kind of quiet that comforted, but the kind that suffocated. There were no more friendly footsteps, no gentle laughter, no scent of Nate's cologne. Even the nurses had changed. They were less talkative, robotic, controlled. Yet Adana's blindness had taught her to read silence louder than words. She knew something had happened. Nate wouldn't just vanish without a goodbye. The last thing he had said to her was, I'll be back tomorrow, I promise. And he meant it. She could feel it in the trembling of his hand when he squeezed hers that day. Something had stopped him, or someone. She didn't cry, because Adana didn't believe in tears anymore. She had wasted enough of them during the years she lost her sight. But a part of her still ached, a raw space in her chest that pulsed with the fear that maybe he had been forced to forget her. Days blurred into each other like watercolors bleeding on paper. Adana sat near the window, letting the sunlight warm her skin, using the faint breeze as her only sense of time passing. Each day she remembered more about Nate, how he laughed like someone trying to hide pain, how he listened with a stillness that made her heart calm, and how he once said, You see more without eyes than I do with them. That sentence kept echoing in her mind. Who was he really? She'd never asked, not because she didn't wonder, but because she wanted him to tell her when he was ready. Now she feared she might never know. But her instincts were stronger than any doctor or politician could anticipate. She began piecing together the puzzle. The oddly respectful way staff treated him, the random whispers outside her door, the careful way he avoided talking about himself. Then it struck her like thunder on a clear day. Nate was someone powerful, someone they were trying to keep away from her. And she wasn't just some accident victim anymore. She had become a threat. Back in the presidential mansion, Nathaniel was burning with fury and helplessness. They had locked him down, stripped him of his security clearance, changed his schedules, and posted guards at every exit. His father claimed it was for his safety, but Nathaniel knew it was to cage him. He had watched from the inside as power destroyed lives, manipulated truths, and silenced the innocent. And now it had come for Adana, the one person who made him feel human. In his room, he paced like a lion, restless and calculating. Every second, without her, was a scream in his head. Then, one night, he slipped a note under the door to his most loyal bodyguard, Yusuf. "I need your help," it said. Not as the president's son, but as a man begging to save the only light in his life. The next day, Yusuf walked in without words and simply nodded. They were going to get Adana back, and no one, not even the president of the nation, would stop them. It happened in a moment so fragile, so fleeting, that even death seemed unsure if it had missed its chance. Nathaniel had finally managed to sneak out of the villa under Yusuf's protection, and, without alerting the security detail, taken Adana to a quiet presidential retreat near the forest edge. It was a secluded space rarely visited, perfect for hiding. He didn't tell her much, only that it was safer than the hospital. She didn't ask questions. She trusted him. It was early evening when they sat outside, surrounded by chirping birds and whispering trees. Adana was humming, a song her mother used to sing to her when she was still able to see. Nathaniel leaned on her shoulder, eyes closed, for once at peace. That was when she stopped humming. Her face froze, her head tilted slightly, her ears flaring as if catching something in the air that he couldn't hear. "Nate," she said softly, "something's wrong." He didn't understand. She stood, her hands outstretched like an antenna. There's a clicking sound, soft, metallic, to the left, high in the trees. It's not a bird. It's not right. He turned, squinting. Nothing. Then, just as he opened his mouth to ask again, Adana screamed, "Down!" Nathaniel dropped to the ground just as a bullet zipped past his head and slammed into the tree behind them, sending bark and splinters into the air. In a split second, Yusuf leapt forward, gun drawn, eyes scanning the perimeter. Chaos exploded. Another shot rang out, missing Nathaniel by inches. They were under attack. "Back door, go!" Yusuf barked. Nathaniel grabbed Adana's hand, pulling her behind him as they stumbled into the forest trail behind a retreat. Despite her blindness, Adana ran without hesitation. "Right," she shouted. "I hear water. It's a stream. It might cover our tracks." She navigated the dark like she could see it. She counted footsteps, felt the vibrations of the ground, and guided them until they found a narrow path beneath a fallen tree. Yusuf fought off two masked men before catching up. They escaped into the trees, breathless, shaken, but alive. That night, as they sat by a makeshift fire deep in the woods, Nathaniel stared at her like she was magic. "You saved my life," he whispered. Adana was silent for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I can't see danger, but I can hear it." Tears welled in his eyes, not from fear, but awe. She, a girl the world called disabled, had done what an entire team of armed guards had failed to do. She'd felt death coming and stopped it. In that moment, he realized something terrifying. If they were trying to kill him now, they wouldn't stop. And if they knew Adana was with him, they would come for her too. Nathaniel made a vow right there, beneath the stars, as she leaned into his chest. If they wanted war, they would get it, but they would never touch her again. By morning, the forest air was thick with mist and uncertainty. Nathaniel had barely slept, holding Adana close to keep her warm, listening to every crackle of leaves, every snap of twigs. He'd lived his whole life surrounded by security cameras and trained professionals, yet he had never felt as safe as he did with her, a blind girl who couldn't see the world, but could feel it better than anyone else he'd ever met. They reached a secluded cabin owned by an old groundskeeper who had once served Nathaniel's mother. The man, now nearly deaf and long retired, didn't ask questions when he saw Nathaniel. He simply opened his arms, wept softly, and gave them keys to the tiny house by the stream. For the first time in days, they had shelter. For the first time in months, Nathaniel felt human. They lived quietly for a few days. No phones, no news, just the two of them, two hearts bruised by the world, trying to remember what peace felt like. Adana taught Nathaniel how to listen, really listen, to the sounds of nature. "Birds never sing without reason," she said one evening. "If you listen, You'll hear when something's off. He watched her as she danced in the kitchen barefoot, bumping into chairs but laughing through it. He'd never seen beauty like that, not on magazine covers or in the grand halls of political parties. He told her about his dreams, starting over, growing a farm, raising a family, without press cameras. That sounds like heaven, she whispered. And for a fleeting moment, it was. They lay on a woven mat that night, staring up at the ceiling. If I could give you my eyes, I would, he said. Adana smiled gently and touched his chest. I don't need your eyes. I have your heartbeat. But peace, like glass, is always a breath away from breaking. Unknown to them, a drone had picked up Nathaniel's location after a heat scan near the border forest. Back in the city, the president's special ops team had been hunting silently. This time, they didn't want to bring him back. They wanted to frame it as an abduction, with Nathaniel listed as missing, presumed dead. The order wasn't from the president himself, but from men in the shadows, those whose power grew when the president's son remained silent. As night approached again, Nathaniel noticed the birds had gone quiet. The air grew still. Adana sat up suddenly. They're coming, she said. I can hear it. The trees aren't moving. Something's wrong with the wind. Nathaniel looked out the window. In the darkness, far across the stream, a red laser flickered against a tree. Then another. They were surrounded again. The silence was too heavy. Nathaniel's instinct sharpened. His breath caught in his throat. The red laser beams dancing across the tree trunks told him one thing. This was no coincidence. He didn't have time to calculate who had sent them or how they'd been found. Adana's senses had alerted him, but now they had only moments. Without speaking, he reached for her hand and gently tugged her toward the floor. Under the bed, he whispered. She didn't hesitate. Yusuf, who had been hiding nearby after tailing the drone activity, burst through the back entrance just in time, signaling Nathaniel to arm himself. There's at least 3, maybe 4, Yusuf said breathlessly. They're trying to be quiet, but they don't know we're already awake. Nathaniel crouched low. His heart was pounding, not from fear of death, but from the terror of losing her. A single bullet to the wrong place, and the girl who had changed his life would be gone. Forever. The first assailant entered through the front, masked, gun raised. Yusuf acted like a shadow. One silent step, then another. In a single breath, he disarmed the man and cracked the back of his skull with the butt of his rifle. The body dropped. Another attacker rushed in. Gunfire erupted. The cabin windows shattered, and Nathaniel pulled Adana into the corner, shielding her body with his own. It's okay, he whispered, more for himself than her. You're okay. She gripped his shirt. There's one more outside. I heard him breathing, low to the ground. Her hearing wasn't just incredible, it was life-saving. Yusuf slipped out through the side and circled around, catching the last man before he could lob a smoke grenade. The final shot rang through the trees, echoing like thunder. And then silence again, this time peaceful. Yusuf stepped back into the cabin, blood on his shirt. We have to move. Tonight. This place is compromised. Nathaniel nodded, helping Adana to her feet. But she was trembling. They came for you, she said softly. And I'm the reason you didn't die. That night, as they fled through the forest under the moonlight, the weight of what happened settled in their hearts. They were no longer just victims of political games. They were fugitives, hunted by men in suits who wore power like armor. Nathaniel thought about how many close calls he'd had in his life. But none of them compared to this. None of them held his heart in their hands the way Adana now did. She had saved him again. Not with weapons. Not with strategy. But with awareness, with presence. She couldn't see the danger, yet she heard it more clearly than anyone. He gripped her hand tighter as they crossed the river. If I lose you, he said, voice cracking, I lose myself. She squeezed back and whispered, then let's make sure neither of us is ever lost again. By the next morning, Nathaniel knew there was no more hiding. Every safe house, every silent ally, every shadowed trail would eventually be discovered. He sat quietly beside Adana, who was resting against a tree, her hand trailing along the grass like she was painting in her mind. The moment was soft, heartbreakingly beautiful, but it was a calm before the storm. Back in the capital, the headlines had already started turning the story against him. President's son missing. Last seen with blind conspirator. The presidency was pushing a narrative that Nathaniel had been manipulated, kidnapped, possibly drugged. And Adana? They were calling her dangerous. A girl with no sight, yet somehow the scapegoat of a national scandal. It infuriated Nathaniel beyond words. This wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. He stood up and made a decision. He was going to face his father. No more running. No more hiding behind Yusuf or shadows. He would demand her freedom, or destroy the entire throne that tried to chain them both. He sent Yusuf ahead to organize a secret route into the presidential compound, one only he and his late mother ever knew. That night, under the thick cover of clouds, Nathaniel stepped into the halls of power not as a politician's son, but as a man with nothing to lose. The confrontation was brutal. His father, seated behind a desk of gold and marble, barely looked up. "So you finally returned from your disgraceful exile," he muttered. Nathaniel didn't waste time. "I came for her. You will release Adana, clear her name, and stop this madness, or I will go public with everything. Every scandal, every lie, every backdoor deal I've been forced to watch in silence." His father's eyes widened for the first time. "You wouldn't dare." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Try me. I'll burn this entire empire if it means saving her." The room was electric. Years of suppressed pain, loneliness, rejection, all poured into that moment. For the first time, the president saw not a broken boy, but a man unafraid of fire. But even power concedes when the heart refuses to bend. Instead of releasing Adana, his father spun a tighter web. That very night, she was arrested. Officers stormed their forest hideaway and took her. Yusuf tried to fight, but was outnumbered. Adana didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Tell Nate. I'll be okay." They took her to a secret holding cell. No trial, no formal charges. Just silence. When Nathaniel returned to the woods and found her gone, his entire world shattered. He punched trees until his knuckles bled. He screamed into the night. And then, with a voice more steady than rage, he said to Yusuf, "We're going in. I'm going to get her out. And God help anyone who stands in my way." Getting into the government facility that held Adana wasn't easy, even for the president's son. The detention center was hidden beneath an abandoned military barracks, fortified by biometric scans, and patrolled by mercenaries not loyal to the Constitution, but to backdoor payments and power. Yusuf gathered a small crew, men once loyal to Nathaniel's late mother, men who had long lost faith in the system, and now only followed honor. Nathaniel disguised himself as one of the guards, slipping in during a shift rotation. Every hallway he passed reminded him of how deep his father's hands reached into the machinery of control. "This country doesn't need leaders," he muttered. "It needs witnesses to the truth." When he finally reached Adana's cell, he paused. Through the small window, he could see her curled on the floor, her head resting on her knees, singing softly to herself. The same song she once hummed at the retreat. It broke him. He opened the door silently. She didn't lift her head immediately, but then her lips trembled. "Nate," she said, as if she didn't believe her own ears. "It's me," he whispered, falling to his knees and pulling her into his arms. "I'm sorry I took so long." Her body shook against him, but not from fear, from relief. "I knew you'd come," she said. "Even when they lied to me, even when they said you forgot me, I knew." Nathaniel looked at her bruised wrists, the tear in her dress, and fury rose inside him like a storm. But he held it in. Now wasn't the time for rage. It was time for freedom. Yusuf signaled from the hallway. They had 10 minutes before the next patrol. Nathaniel helped her up and whispered, "We're going home. Not back to the palace. Not to hiding. But somewhere no one can touch us." As they escaped through a tunnel beneath the compound, the alarms began to wail. The government would spin another story, paint them as fugitives, traitors, terrorists, anything to protect its broken image. But none of it mattered anymore. Adana was free. And Nathaniel had chosen his side, not the throne, not his inheritance, but her. As they reached the outskirts and the sun began to rise, Adana turned her face toward the warmth. "It smells like freedom," she said. Nathaniel kissed her forehead. "Then we'll live in that scent for as long as we can." And in that moment, with no crown, no cameras, no guards, just two hearts beaten by life, they began their journey to a future the world tried so hard to take from them. The world had turned against them, but in that betrayal, Nathaniel and Adana found something rare: clarity. With the help of Yusuf and the Loyalists, they moved through old trade routes and forgotten villages, away from satellite surveillance and digital footprints. They stayed off the grid, never staying in one place for more than 2 nights. Adana, though bruised and physically weakened from her time in custody, walked with a quiet strength that inspired the others. She never complained, never showed fear. Every step she took seemed to echo defiance. Nathaniel watched her in awe, knowing fully well that without her, he'd still be a prisoner in a golden cage. "She's stronger than most generals I've seen," Yusuf once whispered to him. And it was true. Her blindness had not weakened her. It had sharpened everything else. Nathaniel didn't just love her. He needed her. She was his compass. They reached a border town near the mountains, where an old contact of Yusuf's had arranged safe passage through the smuggler's road. It was risky. The area was crawling with private militias and double agents who sold secrets to the highest bidder. But it was their only choice. That night, as they lay in a small cottage hidden behind a banana plantation, Nathaniel and Adana finally spoke without fear. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice a whisper in the dark. "Walking away from your father, from the power, the title." Nathaniel took a deep breath. "Power without peace is a prison. You gave me freedom, and that's worth more than any throne." She smiled softly, reaching for his hand. "And what if the world never stops hunting us?" He kissed her knuckles gently. "Then let them hunt. But they'll never find a man who's running anymore. They'll find one who's protecting what matters." The next morning, just as they were preparing to cross the first checkpoint disguised as fruit traders, the betrayal came. The smuggler who had promised safe passage had sold them out. As they approached the edge of the mountain trail, they were surrounded. Guns cocked. Voices barked commands. Adana froze. Nathaniel instinctively pulled her behind him, his eyes darting around for Yusuf. But Yusuf had sensed the trap moments earlier and appeared behind the captors with a backup plan. A smoke bomb detonated from the truck they had arrived in. Chaos erupted. Nathaniel grabbed Adana's hand, ducked low, and ran. They dashed through the smoke into the trees, bullets zipping past them like angry bees. The entire escape had become a war zone. When they finally found refuge in a cave deep in the mountains, hearts pounding, lungs heaving, Nathaniel broke down for the first time. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "You shouldn't have to run because of me." But Adana held him and whispered back, "No, we're running for each other now." After days of running, hiding, and bleeding under the weight of political betrayal, they reached a quiet village nestled between steep cliffs and dense forest, a place forgotten by time and untouched by the government's iron hand. The locals were kind but suspicious, offering them food and shelter only after Yusuf paid with an old gold coin, a relic from a time when trust came in metal, not words. The house they were given was small, built from mud and clay, but it was safe. Safe enough for them to breathe. For the first time in weeks, Adana slept without waking in fear. Nathaniel began fixing up the place, reinforcing the doors, gathering water, chopping firewood. They fell into a rhythm, one not defined by fear or pursuit, but by the simple miracle of stillness. The town's children grew fond of Adana, especially when she recited stories in the evenings, sitting under a tree and painting vivid pictures with just her voice. "Close your eyes," she would say. "See what I see." Nathaniel, meanwhile, started teaching the village youth how to use basic tools, how to fix radios, build water filters, and farm smarter. It wasn't the life he imagined growing up. It was better. No titles, no cameras, just purpose. Every night, he and Adana sat under the stars, listening to the symphony of crickets, holding hands like they were the last people on earth. He told her things he never told anyone. How he once tried to drown himself in his father's pool. How he used to write poetry in secret. How he never believed in love until her. And she told him of the night she went blind. How she begged God not to take her sight, but when it was gone, she asked instead for strength. "And he gave me you," she whispered. It was a kind of love that didn't need validation. It simply existed, raw, real, and rooted in survival. But peace was a luxury fate didn't allow for long. One day, a stranger arrived in the village. Tall, quiet, dressed in neutral colors. He claimed to be a wandering healer. But Nathaniel's instincts, sharpened by months of betrayal, flared. The man watched them too closely, asked too few questions, stayed too long near Adana. Nathaniel confronted him subtly, without making a scene. But the man only smiled and said, "You don't hide a star in the dark. Eventually it draws attention." That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He walked through the village, watching the shadows, ears sharp for the sound of betrayal. And in his chest, a new kind of fear grew, not for himself, but for her. For the life they had built. For the peace they had finally tasted. He knew then that something was coming. Something worse than bullets or handcuffs. The kind of war that stripped not just freedom, but hope. The betrayal struck like lightning. Fast, merciless, and without warning. It came 2 nights after the stranger's arrival. Nathaniel had gone to gather water at the stream, while Yusuf repaired one of the radios. Adana stayed back, reading stories to the children. As she recited the tale of a girl who fought dragons with only her voice, she paused. Something fell off. The air had changed. The children were quiet, too quiet. Then she heard it. Not footsteps, but silence where there should have been breathing. She turned her head slightly. "Who's there?" she asked softly. No reply. But she heard the glint of metal. A knife being drawn. A breath being held. She screamed. The children ran. But she was grabbed, blindfolded, gagged, and pulled into the woods. The stranger had taken her, and Nathaniel was too far to stop it. By the time Nathaniel returned, the village was in chaos. Children were crying. Yusuf's radio was smashed. A note was left behind in the sand. "Come alone. By dawn. Or she dies." Nathaniel's hands trembled as he read it. For a second, everything went still, his breath, his thoughts, his heart. He turned to Yusuf, eyes bloodshot. "You stay," he ordered. "If I don't come back, protect the village." Yusuf tried to protest, but Nathaniel cut him off. "They want me, not you. This is my burden." Before leaving, he wrote a letter, tucked it in a small box, and buried it beside the tree where Adana once told stories. In it, he confessed everything. His love, his guilt, his vow to protect her, even if it meant dying for her. Then he walked into the forest with nothing but a pocket knife and a heart full of fire. What he didn't know was that the stranger wasn't working alone. He was a hired mercenary, a pawn in a larger plot orchestrated by those who wanted the president's son silenced permanently. The plan was simple. Lure Nathaniel, kill him, and make it look like a suicide. Adana? She was collateral. Tied to a tree, bruised but defiant, she waited. Every sound in the forest fed her fear. But she wasn't broken. She listened, mapped the trees in her mind, marked the breathing patterns of her captors. She knew Nathaniel would come. She could feel it. She always could. And when she heard his voice whisper her name, low, fierce, close, she didn't scream. She just whispered back, "I knew you'd come." And in that moment, the forest stopped breathing. Because love, when pushed to its edge, becomes a force no darkness can swallow. The forest was dense with shadows, and every rustle of leaves whispered danger. Nathaniel moved through the underbrush with practiced caution, his eyes scanning for traps, while his ears remained tuned to the faintest disturbances. His mind raced with every possible scenario. How many men were there? How far they might have gone? Whether Adana was even still alive. But then he remembered her voice, her unwavering belief in him. That belief steadied his heartbeat and sharpened his focus. As he approached the clearing where she was held, he dropped low to the ground, crawling behind thick ferns. He spotted two figures standing guard near a fire, rifles slung casually on their shoulders. In the distance, tied to a tree with a rag over her mouth, was Adana, alive. Her head was down, but her body was still. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Every inch of his body screamed to rush in, but he knew better. One wrong move could mean both their deaths. What he didn't know was that Adana had already begun her rescue, in her own way. Though bound, her heightened hearing had mapped the terrain around her. She could count the footsteps of the guards, knew when they swapped positions, and could tell when one of them had a limp. She recognized the frequency of Nathaniel's soft whisper in the distance, even through the gag. And when she heard the sound of a snapping twig not too far behind her, she knew he was close, maybe 10 steps away. She tilted her head ever so slightly, signaling to him that she was awake and alert. In her mind, she repeated his name, not as a prayer, but as a promise. Nate will come. Nate is here. It was her way of staying grounded in the dark, her way of resisting the fear that clawed at her chest. She had learned to survive without sight. Now she was going to survive without fear. Nathaniel took a deep breath, then crawled around the clearing until he was behind the taller of the two guards. With the swiftness of a soldier, he pounced, locking the man in a chokehold and dragging him into the trees. The second guard turned too late. Yusuf, who had followed in secret, struck him down with a silent blow from behind. Nathaniel rushed to Adana, cutting the ropes with shaking hands. "I'm here," he whispered. She exhaled in relief, falling into his chest. "I knew it," she said. "I knew you'd come." But before they could move, a gun cocked behind them. The stranger, the one who had orchestrated the trap, stepped out of the shadows, weapon raised. "You think you've won," he sneered. "This was never about you running. It was about you dying." But before he could pull the trigger, Adana acted. She had memorized his steps and location from the sound of his boots. She thrust her elbow into his midsection, giving Nathaniel just enough time to tackle him. The gun fired, but missed. The stranger hit the ground hard, unconscious. Nathaniel turned to Adana, stunned. How did you know?" She smiled. "You don't need eyes when you can hear the heartbeat of your enemy." With the immediate danger neutralized and Adana safe in his arms, Nathaniel should have felt relief, but a weight lingered on his chest like a stone refusing to be lifted. They moved quickly from the clearing with Yusuf, dragging the unconscious attacker with them to a safer location deep in the woods. There, they tied him to a tree and searched his belongings. Hidden in his bag were documents, some bearing presidential seals, others of blackmailed confessions from known political figures. What struck Nathaniel most was a photo of himself, circled in red ink, with the word "terminate" scrawled across the bottom. The betrayal wasn't just high up, it was within the inner circle. Nathaniel was no longer just the disobedient heir. He was now considered a threat to the very system his father had built. "They want you erased," Yusuf said gravely. "And if they can't get you, they'll come for her." As night fell, Nathaniel sat by the fire with Adana, his arm wrapped around her shoulders as she rested her head on his chest. But something gnawed at her. "Nay, today I heard someone," she whispered. "I didn't see him, but I knew where he was, and I helped bring him down." Her voice cracked. "Does that make me like them?" Nathaniel held her tighter. "No. You acted on instinct, on survival. You didn't choose violence, it chose you. And you didn't kill him, Adana. You saved me." But her face remained heavy. She had spent her life navigating darkness with grace, never seeing herself as a victim or a weapon. And now, for the first time, her actions had left her with blood on her hands, even if just emotionally. Nathaniel looked into her unseeing eyes and said, "What they've turned us into is exactly what they fear most. People with nothing left to lose, except each other." By dawn, they made a decision. No more running. No more hiding. Nathaniel would expose the truth. He had the documents now, proof of a conspiracy to eliminate him and covered up as a suicide. But going public would mean risking everything, including Adana's life. The world still saw her as an unknown, a mystery wrapped in scandal. "If I do this," Nathaniel said, "we lose our peace, Adana. We lose this quiet life." She reached for his hand. Then let's lose it together. Because hiding who you are, that's not peace. That's fear pretending to be freedom. Her words lit a fire in him that burned hotter than revenge. It was righteousness, forged by pain and cleansed by love. The man who once wanted to end his life now stood on the edge of starting a war not for power, but for truth. And he wasn't afraid anymore. He was ready. The storm came quickly. After releasing the captured mercenary as part of a strategic ploy, Nathaniel leaked the evidence to a whistleblower platform using Yusuf's old military network. The documents, photos, audio recordings, financial ledgers, and communication transcripts painted a damning picture of an administration rotting from within. Within hours, the media was in chaos. News stations scrambled to verify sources. Protests broke out in 3 major cities. Opposition senators demanded an emergency investigation. The president himself, Nathaniel's father, held a private council meeting to contain the damage, but the evidence was too overwhelming. And then came the breaking point. A video confession recorded by Nathaniel himself. He didn't show his face, just his voice. Calm, raw, undeniable. I am the son of the man who leads this nation. I have walked the marble halls. I have seen the shadows they don't want you to see. And I have been hunted, not for what I did, but for who I refuse to become. The truth is no longer a secret. The video spread like wildfire. People saw the pain in his words, the sincerity in his tone. Many expected glamour, but instead they got heartbreak. The president was summoned for questioning by the National Ethics Commission. His approval ratings plummeted. The ruling party began to fracture. In desperation, his allies distanced themselves. Nathaniel didn't return to the capital. He remained in the mountain village with Adana, watching the world burn from afar. But the damage to the palace was irreversible. Under public pressure, the president resigned, citing health concerns. But the country knew better. The throne was empty. And the people began chanting a name, not for a new leader, but for a man who had walked away from power and told the truth. Nathaniel's name. But he refused to return. I don't want to be king of broken systems, he said to Adana. I want to build something from scratch, with you. As the world shifted, Nathaniel and Adana remained grounded. No interviews. No media appearances. No peras. Just silence. Peaceful, honest silence. The kind they had bled for. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and the village gathered for Adana's usual story time, Nathaniel knelt beside her under the tree. In his hand was a wooden ring, carved from the branch of the tree, where she once told her first tale in hiding. You've saved me more times than I can count, he said, voice breaking. Not just from bullets, but from myself. I want to walk every road with you, seen or unseen. She didn't cry. She simply reached for him, fingers tracing his face. I've already said yes, she whispered. The first time you let me feel your heartbeat. And so, surrounded by the people they had once been strangers to, in a village untouched by time, a blind girl and a broken prince found a new beginning. Not in the halls of power, but in the arms of each other. The mountain air was unusually still that morning, as if nature itself paused to watch a moment long in the making. The village had returned to calm. The world below the cliffs roared with politics, investigations, and shifts in power. But here, in this sacred place, none of that mattered. Nathaniel had spent the entire morning carving something, alone in silence. He didn't want gold. He didn't want diamonds. He wanted something that felt like their love, handmade, scarred, imperfect, but strong. He had taken the branch from the tree where Adana told stories and shaped it into a ring with his bare hands. Every groove told a part of their story. The bullet she made him dodge, the tear she wiped without eyes, the strength she gave him when he wanted to die. Now, all he wanted was one moment to give her everything, not as a prince, not as a fugitive, but as a man in love. That evening, he led her to their favorite spot by the edge of the cliff. The breeze brushed through her braids as she sat on a blanket, her face turned toward the sun she could no longer see, but always felt. You've been quiet today, she said with a teasing smile. That's dangerous. He chuckled nervously. I've been thinking. She tilted her head, sensing the shift in his voice. About what? He took her hand in his and placed the ring gently in her palm. About forever, he whispered. I don't have riches anymore. I don't have a throne or servants or security. But I have a firewood ring, a promise, and a heart that beats only for you. She went silent. Her fingers closed around the ring, then reached for his face. Look at me, she said. He took her hands and guided them to his eyes. I may not see your face, she continued, but I feel your soul. I've been wearing your love like armor since the day you said my name. Tears welled in Nathaniel's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Around them, a few villagers gathered at a distance, watching in reverent silence. It wasn't a wedding. There were no decorations, no music, just the sky, the earth, and two people who had survived what most wouldn't even believe. So is that a yes? He asked, voice trembling. Adana didn't need to say the word. She pulled him close and kissed him, slow and deep, pouring into him every promise her voice couldn't carry. It was a kiss not born of fantasy, but forged from wounds, loss, and rebirth. When they pulled apart, the wind carried the faint sound of a song she once sang. She turned to the sky and whispered, Mama, I'm not alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel's smile wasn't sad. It was whole. Years passed like pages in a well-written story, quietly, beautifully, and without need for applause. Nathaniel and Adana never returned to the city. They built a home with mud and timber, planted a garden behind the house, and adopted a stray dog who never left Adana's side. They lived simply, but deeply. She taught children literature through spoken word, crafting worlds with her voice. He taught teenagers engineering from scraps, building water systems and solar lamps for the village. They never wanted recognition. They had already seen what fame could take from a soul. Instead, they chose to be forgotten by the world and remembered by those who mattered. Every morning, Nathaniel would wake up to Adana humming, and every night, she would sleep with his heartbeat under her ear, just as she always had. One spring morning, Adana gave birth to a baby girl. The entire village celebrated as if their own blood had returned from exile. She was born under the same tree where her mother told stories and where her father had proposed. Her name was Chisatir, God sent. Nathaniel held the child in his arms and wept freely. I didn't think I'd live long enough to deserve something this pure, he whispered. Adana, weak but radiant, reached out and ran her fingers along his wet cheek. You didn't just live, she said. You became the kind of man that death couldn't break. Chisatir grew up hearing stories not of palaces or wars, but of firewood rings, forests, whispered songs, and a blind woman who once saved a prince from an assassin's bullet. And when she asked, Mama, how did you see Daddy when you couldn't see anything? Adana would smile and say, because the heart knows what eyes are too proud to notice. As time moved on, the world continued to change. New leaders rose, corruption fell, and Nathaniel's story became more legend than memory. No one knew where he had gone. Some believed he died. Others said he became a monk. Only a few knew the truth, and they kept it secret out of love. One day, many years later, an old traveler wandered into the village asking for water. He saw a man fixing a wooden toy and a woman humming while stirring soup. You look familiar, the traveler said. Nathaniel only smiled. A lot of ghosts do. When the man left, he had no idea he had just spoken to the son of a former president, and he never would. Because blind fate wasn't about legacy or glory. It was about love that bloomed in darkness. About a blind girl who taught a broken prince how to see. And in the end, that was all the legacy they ever needed. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.